Hey, everybody, welcome back to the OnesReady podcast. It's an Aaron and Trent show. I'm in charge today. So Aaron asked me if I wanted to lead this out. So here we are. And we were talking earlier this morning. Jared's out at some race doing whatever, doing chief stuff. I don't know, supporting his family.
That's important. He big timed us.
I know. It was weird. So you all are stuck with just us. So you're welcome. And also I'm sorry for what's about to happen.
He really chiefed us. Yeah.
So we're basically starting a rumor about Jared that's not true, based on a little bit of fact-ish, right? Like we're trying to make it sound like it's something it's not.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen any examples of that in the real world lately, where a little bit of information turns into something more, Aaron?
Boy, have I ever, Trent. Man, so apparently there was some letter about some school that got put out there, and boy, people are all upset. So it goes, we've talked about this a million times, man. Like, we're not a news organization. We're not here to break breaking news. Like, that's not what we do, right? Like, we'd rather be correct and just sort of wait for stuff to actually flesh itself out. So the commander of AFSOC, Lieutenant General Bauerfeind, he sent a letter to half A3. So it's essentially like one level up from him, and it has all of the training in the Air Force. And he was basically like, all right, for STO, CCT, SR, I want you to remove dive for the pipeline for a number of different reasons. So number one, what you got to understand is that 10 years ago, nobody was privy to this information. There would be these rumblings of these letters, these policy letters that went out. Well, now, because everybody has email, everybody knows somebody on social media, you see these things in real time. How long did it take before that broke? Like 6 hours?
I don't know. It seemed cool. You know, like once it hits a certain level, it just keeps going. So
sure.
Like in weather, once a parcel of air reaches a certain level, it just keeps going. See, so this is how it works.
If you're going to tie everything in like this all day, I'm going to leave. I'm going to let you do it yourself. We got a YouTube comment. Good feedback. Thanks for it. Somebody was like, Aaron, you talk too much. You should let Trent and Peaches talk. Today's the day that you guys regret letting Trent talk, because he's going to talk about weather parcels and lifting.
I fully disagree with that comment, by the way. Like this podcast would be awful if you just let me go. I try to maximize like my annoying tendencies in the beginning of a podcast, drive the audience away. And then we can talk about real stuff later.
That is a technique.
Yeah.
So yeah, things move it. And Chief Bass has said it. The previous Chief Master Sergeant in the Air Force, General Brown said it. Things move at the speed of social media. Like, they would just announce policy on social media and get it over with, as opposed to that's a remarkable change, right? So number one, you hear about stuff way earlier. Well, number two, there's misconceptions. I watched a group chat of mine spin out of their minds for like 30 minutes and had some really strong feelings before someone actually read the memo in its entirety, because they thought they were talking about PJs as well.
Yes. No.
So no kidding. I was like, guys, they're not talking about PJs. So what was Trent? What was the memo? What happened?
So the Commander AFSOC, AFSOC requested, like you said, it was kind of like a fact-finding thing-ish, but like it was a request. Like, there's nothing saying like, hey, I am demanding, I am making this happen, whatever, because it's not really under his control. So AFSOC and AETC run on different pots of money and all these other things, and the belly button, or the connective tissue, is at the Pentagon, up at Headquarters Air Force, or Department of the Air Force, whatever you want to call it these days. Now that Space Force is its own thing. We're nerds and stuff. So like this has been a long time coming as well. I don't think this was actually his idea to begin with. I think this was the previous commander of AFSOC's idea. And so this the current commander is I think just driving forward with the policy, or the guidance that he was given, the stuff that had been started by the previous commander. And so that's what it is. It's AFSOC, I think, is as far as I know, is trying to cut the budget a little bit. And there are things that are very expensive and blah blah blah. I don't know, but like he was just like, hey, like, what if we remove this from the 3-level pipeline? And this isn't a new conversation. This conversation has been floating around for a very long time. Dive is always on the bubble.
Oh my God.
I couldn't. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought I'd ended the the annoying stuff. I was wrong. Anyway, so that's where we're at. So Commander AFSOC controls STOs, combat controllers, and Special Reconnaissance under AFSOC, right?
Yep.
And then at half A3, the previous commander of AFSOC is the A3 commander. And so he is actually over the functional management of those career fields as well. And so those two guys are kind of like looking at stuff before they come to AETC to be like, hey, if we actually do this, what's it going to mean?
Okay. Now let's go back. Trent alluded to it.
Does that make sense at all?
It did, and we're gonna deep dive into it so somebody like understands this. Now, the area that we're venturing into, I want to make it clear. I am, if you look at the internet, a POS. I'm not giving you any inside information here. I am a dork that likes fanny packs, right? So I'm not giving you any inside baseball here. Trent has been talking about this conversation has been going on for 15 years. I don't know. Like do you know how many times in my career I've taken that dive bubble off and put it back on? 3 times. 3 times in my career, they have been like, okay, we're not wearing dive bubbles anymore. Or if you went to the Air Force diver course, you're not allowed to wear the combat diver badge. Oh, wait, if you went through the closed circuit portion, okay, now you can. And now we're back to square one, right? So I'm not giving you this is more historical information on the reasoning behind the dive school conversation. This is not inside baseball. I'm not saying I know anything. Nobody's going to listen to me anyway, because I've been talking for too long as it is. So
I listen to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that, but you're contractually obligated to. So here's the reasoning behind getting rid of dive school, especially in the pipeline. Okay. Here's every argument for it. Number one, the likelihood of a 3 level getting right out of school, especially combat, and we're going to talk about combat control, SR, STO, just specifically right now, because PJ, it gets a little bit wonky, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit too. So combat controllers, SR, STO, the dive mission is specifically for infill and usually for closed circuit. Like there are very few things that you're ever going to do open circuit diving unless you're salvage diving in sort of a non-tactical environment, because you're giving off bubbles, right? Yeah. Go.
I think everybody doesn't understand the difference between open and closed.
Open circuit. We've been trying to get a dive school. We're this close to getting a dive instructor on too, because we want to get it on. We're thinking about just talking about dive school and then having them come on and correct us, which is going to happen anyway. But so open circuit is just what it sounds like. The circuit is open. You breathe in air, you blow off bubbles. Closed circuit, there is a closed circuit. When you blow off your oxygen and carbon dioxide, nitrogen, everything else you exhale, it goes into another tube, and then there's a scrubber device, and then it gives you oxygen back. You can't go very deep with it, but that's what closed circuit is. Closed circuit literally means you don't give off any bubbles. You're very sneaky. Fish can't hear you. It's crazy. It's a wild thing, right? So the Air Forces went back and forth on a whole bunch of different iterations. Like when I went through dive school, I was the 2nd or 3rd class or something that went through the Air Force dive school. We were still getting closed circuit. There was a super long period of time where the dive school for the Air Force was no longer teaching closed circuit. Okay. SOCOM defines combat diver as closed circuit capability, because if you're like, the Navy has a ton of people that get surface supply diving where you get air from the surface, and then open circuit where you're blowing off bubbles. That's not considered in SOCOM's view a combat diver. So it caused this big problem. Like we literally just in the last 2 or 3 years, we're like, hey, do you have closed circuit? And they'd say no. We were sending everybody back to closed circuit, like to go get closed circuit qualified. It took like 3 years across the command, right?
Yep.
So all of that aside, the dive infill possibility, and so we're going over like argument 1 of why dive school, people think that, you don't need dive school in the pipeline. Number 1 is because everybody getting it and then nobody doing it doesn't make a lot of sense to SOCOM, and now it's not making a lot of sense to AFSOC, okay? And they've had this conversation forever. It's always been, and we're going to talk about problem 2, which is the assessment, selection, and pre-dive process, which is this whole different argument, right? But number 1, the argument is, okay, we're going to send everybody to dive school. When was the last time that we did a dive mission? People try to do this with free fall, but you actually go on jump missions. You actually have mission, free fall and static line. You actually have, it's not always combat. You have insertion, to airfields. If you think about the global access mission, 100%, there's sometimes where it's more appropriate. You don't know if the airfield is good enough to land on. You might need to jump in. That's always been a thing. So there is a conversation about free fall, and that's for another time. But the dive conversation, usually argument number 1 is we spend all this time, we select people specifically and train people specifically to go to this really hard school to get through, because dive school is no joke. Dive school is hard. And then they never use it, right? That's like the argument that's been happening.
Yeah. I mean, it's always a weird argument, right? people are like, oh, can you tell me that the last time in 40 years that someone did a combat dive mission? And it's like, okay, well, so like the last 20 years, we've been in the desert, the majority, right? Like we've always had people everywhere doing different things. But is now the right time to get rid of that capability as things are heating up, in the South China Sea and all those other places? Could you see a time in the near future where the dive requirement capability would be way more useful than it has been in the last 20 years?
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing too, is that people think about these, it's not just these dive missions that you're, no kidding, swimming to a beach and then getting out and, coming up like the Navy SEAL out of the water with your weapon.
Oh,
there may
so
be
good looking.
Oh man, I can't. You know what? We started off making fun of Jared, and then I didn't bother starting a note for this nonsense. So now Jared is going to be mad at me because I'm not taking any timestamps. So let me just rectify that real quick.
But can I say as well, like there's also another argument, and I'm going to go off on a little tangent here, where they're like, well, why can't we just do it like Army SF, where they have a certain percentage of their guys that are supposed to be dive qualified? And logistically, this is where I run into problems, is we are so much smaller than the Army SF, like the Green Berets. Like how many Green Berets are there? There's piles of those dudes.
Thousands, yeah. So yeah. I want to say between the 1, 2, 3, 4, I think there's something like 3,000 or 4,000 Green Berets.
There's a lot more of them than there are of us, and that's just the Green Berets, right? So like, and also like their capability, their logistics that are built up behind them. They got entire units and the support of the Army and all these other things. And I just don't think we have that. And so when we talk about things like dive and free fall, and this is my opinion, is I think it's better to get the capability up front for a lot of different reasons because we're so small. And then if you decide not to maintain that capability at certain STSs or for the general population, that's fine. Like you are going to save money by not having like a full up dive locker at every STS. Like you don't have to send guys out on dive trips all the time. Like take a few guys, maintain the qualifications, actually make them experts at it. Same with like free fall and all these other things, and have a high level capability with fewer people rather than like trying to spread it across the entire force. Because I think that's another thing that we've proven over like the last 20 years is it's hard to maintain that across the force to a certain degree of competency. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, and I'm going to use the command's own words against them. There's currency and there's proficiency, right?
Yeah.
It's a struggle just to keep everybody current. When you're talking about proficiency, those closed circuit systems that I kind of mentioned earlier, those things are dangerous. They will kill you. It's not like diving regular air. Like diving is dangerous as it is, but when you throw those closed circuit systems on, they operate in a very narrow range. Like when you start putting them outside, too hot, too cold, too deep, you are putting the system together yourself. Like every check that we can do can be the best, but there are dive injuries that people get from these systems. So it's no joke. So the difference between currency and proficiency is a big deal here. And you're exactly correct, Trent. So we're talking about, do we have proficient folks at these? And just to button up kind of like the argument of number one, and remember, we're talking about, well, when was the last time you did this? People think that every dive mission is you're attaching to a SEAL team, you're assaulting a beach, you're going over the beach and you're killing people. No. How about in the middle of, IP, the Indo-Pacific, or how about in the middle of somewhere where your expertise, so let's talk about the stow, right? Let's talk about there's this one stow and he can provide exquisite targeting capability from naval fires onto a ship. But the only way to get him on that ship is he has to jump into the ocean and recover to a sub. If the sub doesn't want to breach, if the sub doesn't want to show people where it is, he's going to have to dive down and dive into the sub. Like there's a bunch of different ways that we can use this dive infill capability other than your classic dive mission. So that argument, it gets really... all of these things have a bunch of nuance to them, right? But start opening up that mind and think about whatever. But when we talk about those other exquisite capabilities that we possess inside of the dive capability, that's one of those reasons why I think everybody should get it up front, right? So I'll put my cards on the table here. I think if you get that dive capability early on, you've got it in your back pocket. Because again, number one, when you get rid of a capability in general, it's really hard to get it back. When you decide like, okay, well, we don't do that anymore, it's really, really hard to get it back. Look at Marine snipers, look at, any one of the Anglo teams, look at Sauti. right? SAO-T, it's a little bit different of a conversation, but we needed a different capability. We're never going back to SAO-T. SAO-T is now in effect dead. It is Special Reconnaissance going forward. And that's how these capabilities tend to go too. It's like, hey, remember when we did X? Tree jumps as PJs, right?
Yeah.
We used to do tree jumps all the time. That's a wacky thing that we used to do. But you look at it now, like, what's the appetite for these young Jays going, oh yeah, tree jumps, dog. That sounds tight. Put on a Kevlar suit and jump into triple canopy. Like, it's just something that we've lost. And then, once it's easy to be away from it.
But it's like I was in, on team when General Armfeld or Colonel Armfeld, whatever he was at the time, decided that if you weren't a PJ in AFSOC, you did not need to maintain your currency on rappelling just because of the time and all these other things, right? And like, unless you're training for a triple canopy insertion,
right?
Like, just focus on the fast rope. Don't worry about rappelling because it's unnecessary risk, right? But everybody still got it in the pipeline. Like, you get qualified on it, you know what you're doing, but and it shortens up the train up if you ever have to do it again. You're like, oh, okay, you're just reacquainting yourself with the systems and getting it done again. And that's another thing, is if you push this, and the idea of like a percentage has been pushed around. Like, oh, we'll just, when we need guys when they're in AFSOC, we'll just get them the dive capability. It's like, hey, like, you have guys on team, and I've seen this in the Green Berets. Like, you take a guy and you're like, okay, you're going to become a dive qualified guy now, like 10 years into your career. And he's like, I don't want to.
Exactly.
Like, well,
exactly.
What do you do when you run into that? Like, or they go through pre-dive and they fail, or they go through dive and they fail. Like, what do you do with that person? And that's like a year-long process to get someone fully qualified. And then AFSOC's paying that bill to get one person qualified, and then they're off team. And so, like, everybody's paying the price. And so, like, the logistically is my biggest concern. That's usually my biggest concern. It's not the theoretical of whether we need it or not. It's like, if you want to maintain this capability at all, and that's I think my problem is they're kind of like waffling between this line of like yes and no. I'm like, oh, well, we still need some of it. It's like, well, then the only way that it makes sense to me is to give it to everybody up front and then don't maintain it across the board. Like, obviously the folks over in Japan, like, they need a dive locker.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well,
but does the 2.6, like, how hard is it for them to like maintain their dive quals out there?
Right. Yeah. And that kind of gets into, we'll talk about the pipeline stuff here in a second, but, let's put problem two is like, how many people do we need it? And what is taking dive school away? Kind of, that's the second argument that you kind of already just, bridged into there. So there's been a lot of talk. Again, I don't know. I'm not smart. I'm not giving inside information here, but there's been a lot of talk about just having closed circuit is its own animal, right? You have to do a separate, and remember, in order to be a combat diver for SOCOM, you have to follow SOCOM's rules. So that's the elephant in the room whenever we talk about AFSOC, is that SOCOM is your daddy. It doesn't matter what the Air Force jump reg says. SOCOM's regs take precedent. It doesn't matter what the Air Force dive reg says. And they just put out a new one. It's like 103507, I think. It does not matter if 3504. It does not matter what that reg says. SOCOM, if you're working in AFSOC, SOCOM tells you what to do. That's currency, that's proficiency, that's your dive supervisor school. That's a lot of things that you have to follow. You have to follow Army rules, regulations, TCs, etc. Right? It's really hard to maintain the closed circuit capability. Number one, because the Air Force doesn't have a lot of equipment. You're not going to every ST, newsflash, not every single ST unit out there has a fully capable closed circuit capability. It's not, I'll tell you, it's not 100. I'm not going to give you a percent to stay away from OPSEC, but it's not 100%. They don't have the equipment. They don't have the dive supervisors that know how to do it. And they certainly don't have anybody that's proficient that's doing it all the time. So the idea was they're going to split East Coast, West Coast. And just like Trent was saying, they're going to have a certain number of teams on the East Coast, probably a Florida team, and the West Coast, probably a team that's closer to the water, like the 2-2. And they would have teams of people that were proficient in closed circuit, and they would maintain that proficiency year round, right? And it would suck because maybe you're not going to do as much jumping. Maybe you're not going to do as much global access. Maybe you're going to focus a little bit more on diving and get really good at those dive skills. And then you'd be the teams able to go fix those problems.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, this how it works anyway. Like, this is how it kind of works with jumping, right? It seems to work better with jumping, where we always have the folks that love jumping. And I mean, it's not their job to be the jump SME for the unit, but they end up being that person that ends up on every single jump. You know, is always in the shoot shop, and they know everything about everything. They're the ones that we go to. We're like, hey man, like we're ordering new equipment. You know, like we're new altimeters or whatever. Like, what do we need? What do we need to do? And it's like they're the SME. So like, and everybody's not a sky god on team. You know, so like you always lean on that person that has that capability, the proficiency to get you all through it. And I think dive is just such a big animal and so time intensive. And then, you know, you have to have the bodies of water to do it. That it just gets really difficult to maintain that, especially with the numbers we're talking about. And, you know, we're in the Air Force, and the Air Force doesn't understand water, generally speaking.
That's always the biggest part of the tour, is when somebody goes and they're like, what's this big boat for? You know, like, well, we jump into the water, we have to go and dive platform boats. It's really hard to find a good multi-purpose boat that works as a dive platform. Like the boats that you can use to support your jump ops and whatever else. Sometimes you can get away with a Zodiac. Most times you can't, but you need a bigger boat, right? And when you start talking about a dive platform, like you need a boat that can get out there and haul divers and haul gear and have a platform where you can launch divers and recover divers. And then where are you going to put the patient and all these other things, right? Like diving is logistically intensive, and it costs a crap ton of money to do and maintain. And that's just one of our skills.
Yep. And on the jump side, like we already have the planes. Like that's what makes jumping easier for the Air Force. Is like we're with the planes already. So like half the equation, you know, assuming that those planes actually like to support us and all these other things.
Of course.
But half the equation is already solved for us when it comes to jumping. The dive thing is just like a different beast.
Right. Yep.
I'm assuming I'm not a diver, so
it is. It's one of those things Jared and I have talked about on the podcast before. You know, jumping looks cool, right? But that's like a 13-hour day anytime that you're going to go jump. If you're going to do a water jump, like that day, you're showing up early, you're getting your brief, you're getting everything together, you're jumping in the water, you got to ride on the boat. That body of water probably isn't really that close to where you work unless you're at the 2-3. And then you got to drive back home, and then you got to rinse everything if it's salt water. Then you got to hang it up. Like those days are long. Dive days are even longer than that. Dive days are exceptionally long, again, because it's dangerous. People usually aren't that proficient at it. You have to get your briefs out of the way and rinse the gear, rejam the tanks, take care of the boats. There's a long logistical tail for typically a pretty short dive day. So it's just one of those things. So let's move into problem 3 here. So the next argument that people use, I'm not going to hit the disclaimer up because I've already done it a couple times and I'm annoying enough that it is as it is.
Stop it, Aaron.
Everybody knows this colloquially. Everybody in the world knows that when you go to Air Force Special Warfare Assessment Selection and Pre-Dive, where do people quit? The pool.
Yep.
Where do people quit? They do it in the water confidence training associated with the pool. Now, if you go back, if you look at the PJ Indoc, the course that I went through, that was 10 weeks worth of pre-dive. And if you're looking at historically at why that is, it's because pararescue, since the start of pararescue and this is back when, you know, Peaches went through a blended team. So he went through just before I did. I want to say he was like 2001, 2002, I think, Jared, because he got in like a year or two before me. But it was still when combat controllers and PJs were going at the same thing. That's because we were immediately sending them to an Army school right away. It was you were getting done with Air Force Indoc, and you were going to go to the Army's CDQC, the Combat Diver Qualification course. And the Army hated us. Like, let me tell you a little bit about dive school. They used to have what they called the boathouse boogie. The dive instructors down at Key West, Florida, were superhumans, and they used to just try to smash everybody. So it was all these old Army dudes, like Trent was talking about earlier, guys that had been on team and already had real world experience doing stuff. And then they decided they were going to a dive team. So it was those guys, and then these young 18-year-old Air Force punks that were in the best shape of their life. And they just tried to smash you all the time. And the second that a PJ or a controller failed or even got close to failing, they would just kick you out of the school. So in the spin up, getting ready to go to those schools, Indoc and the pre-dive courses that they would push, or the pre-dive couple of weeks, usually it was just Indoc. Man, it was all about passing those dive events. Like a lot of the water con drills that we do to this day came out of the Army CDQC course. They came out of the Coast Guard Rescue Swimmer course, and they came out of the CDQC course. And that's why we do, like, that's why you're doing tank treads at, NDOC for the longest time. That's why you're doing weight belt, because those were high attrition events that they were kicking people out of the Army school for, and they built them into NDOC, and it became part of our water training. And then a whole, instructor is going to instructor. So they came up with other alternate WaterCon events, really just to make you super uncomfortable in the water, so that when you got to the Army school, they couldn't kick you out. Right.
Yep.
So there's Uncle Aaron's history lesson for the day. A lot of the things we do, ditch and don, mask and snorkel recovery, underwaters, both on an interval and for distance, doing the giant stride front flip 50. Guess where that came from? It came from CDQC. That's why we do it. Right. So that stuff has evolved. If we, and we're going to talk about water confidence and its other applications here, but if we made the courses and events specifically for dive school, and most of the people fail during those events, then it would stand to reason that if you got rid of those events, in theory, we'd be able to get more people to get through the pipeline. I know this is going to get crazy. Here we go. I've seen a bunch of people that were probably good operators, probably valuable people, could not get over the water. They ended up quitting. They ended up not being able to make an event. It's usually quitting. They couldn't get there. They couldn't get through, the NDOC or the assessment selection, and then they were out. So this is not my argument, because I am making NDOC great again all the way, 100%. What I'm saying is, this is the argument, is that if we remove this very high attrition event that doesn't have a whole lot of operational relevance, because remember, that was problem one. How much do we actually do this? Well, we don't do it a lot. Well, then why are we so focused on selecting somebody that can do these specific events that they don't do a whole lot? Can't we get more people through? That is argument number 2.
So
I'd love it.
I was an instructor in the Saudi CCT pipeline during a time when, after a student had died in the pool, we were not allowed to do water confidence training. And we weren't allowed technically to drop the students for whatever reasons for a year or so, whatever it was. The attrition rate for the pipeline at the time, because at that time, dive was a 5-level requirement for combat controllers.
Right.
So they didn't do pre-dive and dive until after the pipeline. If you look back at the attrition rate for the pipeline, though, during that time, it's the same as the full attrition rate for the pipeline now. So I know everybody thinks oh my goodness, if we got rid of dive, we could put so many more people through. It's we're still preparing these people for a special operations off the street job.
Right.
And we are going to make the training is going to be difficult no matter what. And so whether you remove all the dive specific items and it's just water confidence after that, like the memo said, or even putting them through pre-dive, which there's logistical issues with that as well.
Sure. Yep.
You're going to have the same attrition rate. So the attrition model doesn't work for me. That argument, it doesn't hold any water. I can't help it, dude.
Oh,
they just
my God.
These terrible dad jokes write themselves, and I hate myself when I say it. The only thing that makes me happy is how much more you hate me when I say it.
It's hard. You're honestly one of my best friends on the entire world. I love you to death. But if you keep doing this, I'm gonna need a break. I'm just gonna need to not talk to you. Here's exactly why. And I will say this. I'm gonna put my cards on the table on this one too. I want to be clear about what I'm saying here, and then I'll kind of back it up. I think you should keep the pre-dive program, the water confidence, as it exists, because I think it speaks to who we are as a force and not necessarily to a capability that we're looking at down the road. And I think that's why when you have people that aren't operators, that aren't beret wearing dudes that have ever worked on these teams, and they're saying, well, just get rid of this thing, and they don't understand why we want to keep it. This is where you run into problems, right? I'm not saying plainly and clearly, I want to keep all the WaterCon, all the alternate WaterCon, all the events. Those should be in assessment selection. Those should be in assessment selection and whatever we're calling pre-dive. I am not saying that supports them going to dive school. We can run a pre-dive. I can run a pre-dive course, and we've shown this. You can run a pre-dive course to get somebody through dive school. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is water is the great equalizer. When we go attached to other teams, we talk about this all the time. We're not a Green Beret team, right? The Green Beret selection is completely and totally land based, right? The SEALs, they're way more water based, right? But they don't do the true dive stuff until, phase 2, phase 3. Phase 1, really a buds is hell night. It's running on the beach and it's being uncomfortable and it's working as a team. And then, after you get out of phase 1, then you go to phase 2. Marines, same thing. They don't do any of this underwater dive, real selection stuff in the pool like we do. And here's why. Because you're completely on your own in the water. There is no team event in the water. You may be doing things together. Like if you're doing 10 ups or if you're doing a group exercise, you're doing it together, but you pass or fail individually. We're breeding you and selecting you from a very young age as an operator that no matter what's going on around you, you have work to do and you have to get it done. And that sounds like being a JTAC. If the world is blowing up like Chief Gutierrez, if the world is blowing up around you, it doesn't matter how hurt you are, what your team is doing. You have a job, and that's being a JTAC, and you got to get it done. That sounds like being a PJ. It doesn't matter what else is going on. If you're Jason Cunningham and people are literally turning the CH-47 that you're in into Swiss cheese, it doesn't matter. You got to treat those people. You got to save their lives, right? That's what the pool is. It's being calm in the worst possible scenario. So we're going to take away your oxygen. We're going to take away your ability to see your teammates. We're going to make you uncomfortable. We're going to close, like the water sounds different, right? Like sometimes you say it fills your ears in such a way that you feel like you're alone and you're in space and things are muffled and you can't hear. That's the point. We're not getting ready for dive school. I don't give a shit about getting ready for dive school and those assessment and selection events. I care about forcing you to act individually for the better of the team. And then if everybody does it great, the team performs. But I want you individually to go, I either swim another 5 meters or I pass out. I either tie this knot or I pass out. I either give my buddy this snorkel and we continue to breathe or I fail. That has nothing to do with dive school for me. Those two things for me aren't really that linked. It's breeding the type of and looking for and breeding the type of people that we need to do these jobs. So people get it twisted where they're like, well, you guys don't really dive that much and a ton of people quit in the pool. So why don't we just get rid of dive school? That'll get us more people. No, I don't want those people. I want the people that can make it through the water events because I think it speaks to who we are as career fields.
Yeah. Well, we select individuals way more than the other services, right? I think that's what you just said. So, and that there's no better way to see who an individual is than to take away their oxygen, than to put them in the water, to induce that fight or flight immediately. Because as soon as that water hits your face, if you haven't trained, like that's what it does. That's who we are as humans.
Exactly. Yeah. You can say whatever you want. You can talk whatever shit you want on the Discord, say whatever you want on the YouTube channels, do whatever you want. The first 5 minutes that you're in a pool, I can't tell if you're going to make it or not, but I can tell if you've trained.
Yep.
And then after that, now it's time for me to, okay, well, if you've trained, all right, let's start turning the volume up. Let's start turning the intensity up. Now let's see how much you can take, because those are the type of people that we want to take. So when we talk about getting rid of dive school because it somehow will lower attrition, in my experience, it doesn't. Number two, I am not a fan of equating the things that we're doing. Of course, there's an argument of, you should select people for a job skill. And we went through this with the Whizzer and we went through this with our fitness tests. And we talked about this ad nauseum. I don't want to branch off into that topic, right?
Let's do it.
No, absolutely not. Stop it, Trent. You're on one today, my guy. But I don't think that everything needs to tie in directly to, okay, what are we going to do later? I think that there's magic in the mixing. There's, for finning, for cardio, we're not doing long fins. Like even the guys that are doing dives, they're not doing 3,000 meter surface swims up rivers like the Germans, like that's not a thing that we're doing either.
This is
Germans, but it's cardiorespiratory fitness and being able to, complete an event and doing some other stuff. Like I get it. I'm here for it. And by the way, why do we fin at ANS and pre-dive? Because you do long surface swims at dive school, which we took directly from the Army again.
And there's other applications, but I'm with you. There are things that are understood by a community that from the outside, you're not going to see. Like the selection process, the entire pipeline is not built for a capability necessarily. And so when that individual finds themselves in that situation where they are the person, the make or break, link in that chain between mission success and mission failure, and their whole team dying and with them, or all of them making it out safe. Like, that's what we're doing. We want to give them the confidence that no matter what, they can be successful. Like, they have the tools. They are that person that can do that job. Like, that's what it is. It's not so that we can create, the best divers. It's not so that we can create the best fallers. You know what I mean? It's to create that problem solver that can do that in any situation and has that confidence. Like, we get accused of being cocky all the time. Like, you can tell our guys walking around. You can see it. That's what we're breeding on purpose. That is the purpose, is to breed that person, to create that person that can do whatever, whenever, to accomplish the mission. That's it.
Yep. I was doing when we used to do the enlisted assessments for pararescue, specifically the cross-training assessments. We were in an interview. There was a guy that we were hitting him on the interview board, and he didn't make a single. We were doing a simple alternate water con event, right? So I think it was 10 ups. It might have been crossovers. Short story, he didn't make one of them. He popped every single time, right? And I was like, hey, tell me about, I'm concerned because you popped, you didn't make one of these events. And he was like, oh, well, it was just tough and I was tired and, I just, I couldn't do it. And I was like, well, here's the problem with that is I think that's a chink in your armor. I'm like, what we need people, like, what happens when it's 15 meters of machine gun fire? What happens when you have to make this event, like you have to do this task, whether it's a high angle event or a combat event or, something that is high danger. I was like, you showed me today that you were not willing to put aside those personal fears, that pain, that, that problem. You couldn't complete this event. We need people that do impossible things. I need you to look at this event and go, okay, whatever this event is, I don't care. I'm getting it done. Like, those are the people that we want. And I think that was a problem with you. And I think that that's true. I think that we need those people. It's a reach back moment. That's what we're building from the very beginning of your pipeline. Does it directly correlate to something that we're going to do in the job? No. When you start going down that road, when you're like, the dumbest argument that ever, we had a fitness test that wasn't exactly the greatest, right? The AFSOC fitness test before the OFT. And the big hit here was like these, skinny 115-pound officers. They would run the fitness test because they could run for miles. They could do cows for days, and they would drop a 700, which was the highest score on the AFSOC PT test, but they couldn't deadlift their body weight.
Yep.
Well, the conversation then became, well, could you carry me and my kit? I weigh 240 pounds of my kit. And the officers would go, well, that's not part of the fitness test. The fitness test is supposed to mimic the job. So where is that in the job? And once you start going down that path, you start having dumb conversations, and it ends up in stuff like this, right? Oh, well, when are you ever going to have tanks on your back and you have to hold your breath and swim underneath, 20 meters and get over? That's not the point. That's not the point of the exercise. Is stress inoculation. It's not a direct representation of an event that you're going to do in the job.
Yeah. 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 Everything we do is like that. Like, we're going to put you in terrible situations to get you ready for the worst situations, or flexible situations. So yeah, you want to talk about the logistics of removing it from the pipeline a little bit?
Yeah, we sure can. I think before that, though, we should hydrate. I saw you had a hoist cup up earlier. That looks pretty cool.
I'm so glad you're here today. I have a hoist cup with me today.
I saw that. I pay attention to what you're doing. Did you get that over at drinkhoist.com where you can use our code OnesReady at checkout and get a discount on anything that you want, or no?
If I was smarter, I would have used the discount. Yeah. But I also like to support my friends. And it seems weird using my own code. You know what I mean?
Not to me, baby. I'm frugal. I'll be using that code OnesReady over at drinkhoist.com all the time. Our friends have come on the podcast and talked to us before. You may notice our team is getting bigger. So Demi Bagby is out there doing her thing. She's an awesome follow on Instagram. Rachel Waters, we had her on the podcast before. So she's a pro obstacle course runner. She does a ton of crazy stuff. So she's awesome as well. They've got their own codes. We're not picky. Just go over to drinkhoist.com. Check out your favorite flavor. I'm a Pat guy. They've got premixes. They're popping up everywhere, by the way. I've seen them every time that I look, and it warms my little heart. when I see a big display of hoist in like a shop at or
That's
in
so
a random,
nice.
a random grocery store. I'm like, I know them. They're my friends. I've actually taken pictures and DM them. Just be like, oh, look what I saw because I am an idiot. So
Well, and they're DoD approved. You know, it's better than the lizard water or whatever. In my opinion, it works way better.
Yeah,
and the flavors are fantastic. And those little like pouches that they have that are still liquid with like the little twist off top, like those are amazing because like you can just shove those down.
Yep.
It sounds weird. Shove those down your throat real quick, but like boom, instant hydration.
Oh man, the ad read immediately went to. We should not be trusted with this stuff. Like every time Peaches doesn't show up, like I feel like
this is a serious podcast about serious things, folks.
He pays a penalty. Go over to drinkhoist.com. Use our code OnesReady at checkout. You'll get a sweet deal, whether it's the premix, the packs. We love y'all. Hoist, you're amazing. And while you're at it, while you're typing stuff into your browser, just go to OnesReady.com. Check out our store. We got a bunch of stuff on there. You want a sweet leather koozie? I got you, boo-boo. I got you. Go over and check it out.
That sounds so bougie. Are we appealing to the bouge now?
It is, yeah. We're trying to be grown up over there. So Mission Mercantile, one of our partners over on the website. Awesome. Fine leather goods. Treat yourself. They're awesome. They're great folks. Connected with a bunch of veteran organizations that do a lot of charity and a lot of outreach. That's why they're there. So check out OnesReady.com for everything. Got a reading list. We're constantly building the site out. So go spend some time on there and check stuff out. Trent, how hard would it actually be? Let's get real nerdy.
Oh no!
Listen, if you guys we were talking about working out, we were talking about motivating stuff. We're about to launch an AETC, and the reason that we're going to talk about this is because we want you to be able to look at this stuff and realize that there's a much bigger process than one general sending a letter to another general and then everybody freaking out, because that's what tends to happen, right?
That's when our views just like.
Pew. Well, it's when the first time that I talked, you can tell I see the analytics a lot, and it's just. Right off a cliff, my guy.
Hey.
So there is execution, and then there's logistics, right? Amateurs playing for execution, professionals playing for logistics. What is the sort of thing? What is the sort of logistical tail that follows in getting one of these things removed from the pipeline? How hard is that to do in reality in the bureaucratic AETC interaction?
Okay.
Buckle up, kids.
The beginning of the pipeline is designed to get people through dive school. Like all of your water items, your training items in the water are linked to the dive bubble, to the dive school. And I'm not saying that we couldn't find a way to link those to something else. But as it stands now, all of the paperwork, everything else, like having it, a little background, coming from Sauti, right? We had water confidence training and all this other stuff without a dive bubble, right? So we had to have a whole bunch of stuff in our CFETP to justify putting guys underwater, doing all the things that we did, and without having a dive bubble. Like when you have a dive school in your pipeline.
The CFETP is the Career Field Education and Training Plan. We've talked about it before, but it's the huge menu of items that you have to do to be whatever, and everybody has them, right? If you want to be a bomb loader, if you want to be a security forces airman, if you want to work at the medical shop, you have a CFETP. It tells you this is 3 level, this is 5 level, this is 7 level. So we just want to clear that up, right? So CFETP, the menu of things, and every single one of those things, like Trent's about to tell you, has to be justified. It has to be like, you have to be able to tie it to a task and say, we're doing this because this, and here's how you evaluate it. Go on, Trent.
Well, all enlisted career fields have them. Maybe enlisted crows and tech POs don't have one right now.
Goodness.
Moving forward, and so like that's what I'm looking at, right? So like when you have the dive school in there, it makes so much stuff easier because you can just justify it by having dive school in there. And so if we remove dive school from the 3-level pipeline, you have to go back through all that paperwork. And there's actually STS. STS is the line items in the CFETP that tell you what the requirement is and to what level you're training it. Every training item you have in AETC, you list out the STS line items that you're covering in that training event. And so it's just going to be a lot of paperwork to go back through and to re-justify and to get all the career fields back together, minus the PJs because they're awesome. They're going to keep dive. To rework their CFETPs, to rework the STS line items, to rework the curriculum, to justify the curriculum without the dive requirement through the pipeline. And that goes all the way back through like your PT test and everything. This could affect SWOEV and all these other things that we're talking about. So logistically, it's very, very difficult. And in the memo, it said like, hey, we'll maintain the pre-dive requirement. Well, our current pre-dive school is SOCOM accredited for the combat dive course that our folks all go to. And so right now, as it stands, we have a SOCOM accreditation for that pre-dive course. And you can't go through it multiple times. It's going to be hard to justify if we go through an accredited pre-dive course in AETC, and then 6 years later, we want to send someone through dive school. Well, they already met the requirement by going through the pre-dive course, but they're not going to be ready. And so like all these units, somewhere someone's going to have to stand up another, unofficial pre-dive course to get these folks spun up to go to dive school. Otherwise, you're just going to be wasting money sending people to dive school. And we all know that it's a difficult course, especially if you're not trained for it. And then you're going to have a bunch of failures. And so that's where we're at right now. So like another thing is if you remove SR, STOWs, and combat controllers, the SOCOM accreditation is probably not important anymore because ACC, Air Combat Command, owns the PJs. And so then the combat dive requirement is probably going to go away. And so do we still need that SOCOM accredited pre-dive course? And so I don't think we do. And then would we change it based on that, which is basically what they were running at INDOC, where INDOC was 4 weeks of assessment selection, basically, followed by 4 weeks of pre-dive, which is kind of how it looks now, just separated. But then are the PJs still going to go through the combat dive course? Or are we just going to release the accreditation at our dive program for SOCOM and just do open circuit? Because how do you justify closed circuit without the SOCOM stuff and everybody else going through it? And so there's just a lot of moving pieces. It's going to be difficult. And then on the manpower side of the house, PJs are going to have to step up and man the dive school fully. I think it's PJ heavy as it is, but
I would have to look at the numbers. I know that they've been pushing to get more controllers. I don't know if there's any SR that work down there. You guys are too small for that, I would assume. Like somebody that would actually be dive qualified and then would be an instructor down there, I would assume that would be really unlikely. But yeah, PJ heavy.
Well, yeah, I mean, speaking of like timelines, right? Like the SR guys got the dive requirement not too many years ago. It takes time to get someone dive qualified through team back to be an instructor, spun up to be an instructor at the dive school. So that's where we're at. And so I think it's a little PJ heavy at the dive school. I think the free fall course is where we have more controllers.
That's true. Yeah.
And that's just kind of how it all works out. And the functionals work through that stuff and share manpower and all those other things. All that being said is, so like that's just the dive question, right? Like there's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of things that have to happen. And usually these are like multi-year projects to make these things happen correctly with the paperwork.
Yeah, usually it takes 2 years. If you're going to make a change to the CFETP, like if you're going to make a sweeping change or you're going to change a bunch of line items, it's a 2-year process.
Right.
You get everybody together. You have these big, typically conferences where people fight over what it is because there's a bunch of different shareholders and stakeholders, depending on how you want to look at it. And they have all these arguments like, take this line item out. No, we want this line item. We want this line item. We don't think that's important. You have to do that process. And then there's an end state to that. And then there's another process. And then there's an end state to that. And then you're actually planning and writing the thing. And there's an end state to that. And then by the time it gets published, like these things are supposed to happen on a 2-year cycle.
Right. So it takes a long time. And then what a lot of people are not talking about is the recruiting process in SWOEV, right? Mm-hmm. So I think everybody's tracking halfway or 2/3 of the way through the prep course or SWIC. The TACPs, because they don't have that dive requirement, they can't justify the ANS and the water intensity that happens there. They break off and they just go to their apprentice course, which has its own problems. Like I think they're working on a selection type event or whatever that they previously lost, by the way, and getting it back is difficult. It's weird. When things go away, it's hard to get them back.
Yep. Because they use that against you. They're like, well, you got rid. Like the question number one that you have to answer here is, well, you got rid of it before. Why do you need it now? And that is a hard question. You'd think it'd be an easy question to answer. Be like, well, because we do. Not when you're talking Air Force funds. Not when you're talking DoD funds. Not when you're talking accreditation. It's tough.
Yeah, all that money goes somewhere else real quick. Everybody's
Very
waiting
fast
to get a piece of that pie.
Yeah.
Unless you have a round study that comes back and says TACPs need a selection event after they got rid of it. It's really hilarious. Okay, moving forward. So like, how do you justify putting everybody into this SWOEV 9T500 AFSC where they come in and then putting them all through the same selection course, putting them all through the same pre-dive course, if the dive requirement is not required for 3 of those AFSCs? And so like, it's a tricky situation. Now you could just if a 3-star general just says this is the way it is, and it goes up to the 4-star general and he says this is the way it is, then they can just make it happen. But I'm saying, like, to do these things on paper correctly, a lot of stuff is built around this single school in the pipeline, and so it'd be really difficult to do it in any time, any kind of timeline that's not years.
Right. And we tell you all this just to tell you, to give you some more nuance to the conversation. Because again, it's easy to look at it on social media and be like, oh, AFSOC is getting rid of dive. So, I mean, not really. There's a lot of other things that we have to have. This is just a next step in, whatever it is that you're going to call the, ST Next or AFSPEC War 2.0 or, whatever we're calling, the evolutions that we're going through to right size the force and capabilities going forward. So we're just trying to give you some nuance here. That's it.
Yeah. And there's probably like 800 things that I didn't mention. And also I probably got 1 or 2 things wrong. So like, if anybody's out there about to make a comment, like, okay, I probably got something wrong. But it's a complicated process. It makes sense once you're in the process, but like all these things connect. All right.
Does it make sense once you're in the process?
I've been in AETC for a long time. It makes sense to me. And just one little shout out about AETC: the way that people write curriculum in the Air Force is the way that people write curriculum in academia and all those other places. I've said it before, but people are like, "Oh, AETC doesn't make any sense." It's like, well, this is how this is done in the regular world as well.
Right?
It is what it is.
It makes sense in academia. You just don't understand the academic process, which is why you think AETC doesn't make sense. So let's hit it real quickly as we get to the end here. Let's talk about why PJs weren't mentioned in this thing. You already alluded to it. Number one, you don't get to tell ACC what to do. So the preponderance of forces of pararescuemen in the United States Air Force, it's actually the Guard and the Reserve. And that's going to come into this more than 50%. I'd have to look. I think the last time I looked, like 61% or something of PJs that are current qualified actually work in the Guard and Reserve. I think that might be a little high.
Well, it's over 50 for sure.
It is. It's 100. I am positive that it's over 50. I know that for sure. So we'll talk about that in a second. But the majority of PJs work in ACC. Okay, ACC is there to provide combat rescue, personnel recovery, sensitive item recovery to the larger Air Force. Salvage dive is a part of that. I've had friends that go dive after drones. I've had friends that go dive after, if there's the ocean or the earth is 70% water. If we need somebody to go recover an Air Force asset and we can do it, we're going to go do that. Now, it doesn't mean that we, pararescuemen do all the stuff that the Navy does. There's, a great example of a time I was in Africa. I think Lake Victoria is the world's deepest freshwater lake. There was no kidding, a SUV was driving along the side of the lake, fell off into the lake, and it was immediately like 1,000 feet. It was like an 800-foot dive right away, right? Obviously, we are not going on that. That is a problem for someone else to fix. But we do have a certain dive capability that we can do salvage or permissive diving, non-combat environments. So, pararescue is always has always needed that capability. So that's kind of reason number one, ACC owns the forces. So the AFSOC commander can say, well, I don't want that, and that's why specifically pararescue was left out of this, because the AFSOC commander doesn't have. The COM ACC is a 4-star. COM ACC is, is going to read that letter and go, cool, well, my PJs need it. So I have the preponderance of forces. We're just going to go ahead and continue on with our training as is. So that's kind of number one, is he doesn't own the forces. So that's why I wasn't on there. I will say that this has been a talk for pararescue for a long time. We went back and forth. There's a bunch of PJs out there right now that don't have closed circuit because of this conversation, right? They went through. They ended up working for ACC. ACC doesn't require them to be a combat diver, as SOCOM says. So they never went back and got the closed circuit. There is no requirement for PJs to have closed circuit diving. I just so happened to go through in the first iteration of the dive school and got closed circuit, and then was able to maintain that, currency at least throughout my career, because I came back to an ST. There's plenty of PJs that, they bounce around the rescue units and maybe they go hit an instructor gig and they never got closed circuit. They're just open circuit divers because that's all they required for the job. So reason number one. Reason number two, the Guard and Reserve has a lot to say about the pararescue community because they have so many people in there. So it's number one, the sheer number of people. And then number two, the stateside mission. These dudes do stateside salvage, diving, rescues, and recoveries all the time. So the Guard and the Reserve is like, no, we actually have a need. You know, there's lakes, there's bodies of water. We need to go actually do this thing. So the Guard and the Reserve is like, get rid of dive. No. Our state needs us to maintain a dive capability. Our state needs us to be able to go and do these dive recoveries. Like, I know for sure the Nellis guys have spun up to go on dive, search, and recovery missions out in Lake Mead. I know for sure.
It's Puddle Mead now, actually.
It is, yeah, it's getting small and small. You know, those stateside missions exist. And there is no way that the stateside commanders let those missions go away. And that's outside of all of the combat search and rescue. Because remember, like, we have a stateside mission and a humanitarian mission. So number 3, right? Now, number 1, you don't get to tell ACC what to do on the PJ side of the house. Number 2, you got the Guard and Reserve for the stateside mission. And then number 3, encapsulating all that, there's a humanitarian mission. You could have to go, again, teams get called to do wacky stuff all the time. Like living in Vegas, we would get called to go out to Zion and search for hikers. And same thing in Albuquerque. I had teams that went and recovered people that got lost hiking, or, you know, they got stranded places. You get that dive mission if you live there. Like, there's, you know, I believe that there have been PJ teams that have gone out on dive recoveries at Havasu, like out of DM, right? Even places that you'd think that it wouldn't happen. Like now, obviously, like New York, Moffett, you know, and that doesn't even start to talk about the dive requirement that's necessary for NASA space shuttle recovery down at Cocoa Beach, right? Like all of these things are playing into it, where, you know, the dive salvage capability, because you got to remember it's kind of different between combat diving as SOCOM defines it, and then what PJs need to dive for, which is, you know, rescue recovery. For those reasons, you know, it's at least not a question now. I will tell you, this has gone back and forth, like I alluded to earlier, about do we need to send every single PJ to dive? And up until now, that question's been answered with yes. Up until now, every single answer has always been yeah, because of these reasons.
Well, logistics. It's difficult to catch it on the back end, you know?
It is.
So, do currents affect the non-combat diver? Or
yeah,
is that the difference?
Wind, waves, and tides. Winds, waves, currents, and tides. They affect the non-combat diver like an MF. But a combat diver doesn't affect them at all. You don't have to plan for it. You're totally fine. That's a dive school joke, everybody.
Yeah, if you don't get the joke, it's fine. Yeah, I don't get the joke.
I love it.
I never even, yeah. I think we covered that pretty well.
I think so. Here's the thing is, like, everybody wants to, it's way better to be pissed off on the internet. It's way better to look at thing and make some snap, you know, just, and then pretending like, you know, how the process is going to go on. If you don't work in AETC, like even to our active duty brothers that saw this thing and then just started freaking out, like, unless you have a really good idea of how to kind of like peel through the layers of this, you probably don't have a real good idea of what you're talking about. If you haven't worked in AETC, if you haven't done course planning, if you haven't done, you know, the CFETP rewrites or STRTs or some of these other things that you have to go through, it's a long process. Now, granted, things been wacky these last 3 years. Things really have been weird. Like some of the personalities at play in the last like 3 or 4 years of ST, I got it. It gives you kind of that feeling of like, I don't know, there is a process, but what if they just ignore the process? What if they just burn it to the ground and go? I guess those things are always there. But bottom line, right now, nothing has changed. It was a letter sent from one general to another general, essentially opening the conversation to say, hey, what if we did this? And we go from there.
But yeah, I'm always going to fall on the side of, you know, like our E6s and below. And I think they would like to maintain the capability. And I've talked to some of these guys that think that it's an important capability moving forward. And so if it's important to the guys, the folks, right, then it's important. And they're the ones that are looking down the barrel. So, you know, I'm not saying that, you know, any of these O's are being malicious or any of this other stuff. Like, I don't know. But I do think that if the community is saying this is important, then it is important. And I'd like to keep it around. Not with, you know, aside from all the logistical, all this other nightmare that, you know, occupies my brain space of making it happen or not. I think it's, you know, as a guy that wasn't dive qualified that didn't go through, any of the selection processes and all these other things, I'll tell you that I think it's important. Like there's a different type of mentality. There's a confidence that you get earlier on in your career that is important to accomplish the mission. So, yeah, I'm as impartial as I can be, I think, about this from the outside looking in, and I think it would be a shame to get rid of it.
Agree. Feels like a good place to end because I don't need to overtalk it. You crushed it.
I just wanted to bring up the Discord thing where they were like, can you believe this guy is on here talking about Air Force Special Warfare and he never went through selection and all these other things? I'm like, I think I talk about this, don't I? Like
all the time. It doesn't matter. You're never going to make the internet happy. They're going to be mad at you for whatever. It doesn't matter.
I was happy to get some attention, if I'm honest. I was like, I made it. Like people are, and then they wouldn't say my name. I'm like, that's pretty obvious.
That's my thing that I always laugh at. Like, throw a tag in there, bud.
Yeah.
Like, stop subtweeting me. Throw a tag in there. I want to laugh. I want to giggle at your dumb meme. Like, but no, never happens. So
it's disrespectful. They won't even mention my name.
It is. Well, yeah, it is. It's like I've been rewatching Breaking Bad. So it's like, Gustavo Fring talking to, Don Salamanca, and he's like, will you look at me today? And he won't look at him. It's kind of like the same thing. Yeah. It's like you'll sit there and you'll be mad, but it cost Don Salamanca his life.
It'd be what it be. Yeah. Cool, man. Well, it's good to see you today, Jared. I hope you had a fun time doing whatever it is that you're doing and not being here with us.
Let me tell you how he chiefed us. I'm not gonna put it out there because I don't post pics of the group chat. I asked yesterday specifically. I was like, all right, cool. This task is done. Tomorrow's a good time to record. We don't have anybody else on the schedule and something else. Like it's 3 very distinct things. Chief Peaches responded with yes, yes, and yes. He's up this morning firing text messages off because we record early. He's firing text messages off 6 o'clock on a Saturday. Bing, 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 crushing it. And then Trent and I, we get on board. We get on the thing, and Trent's like, "Well, Peaches, are you going to get on?" And he's like, "Oh no, dude, I'm out at this race. I'm out doing this thing." He's like, I didn't even think we were recording today. I screenshotted him. He was like, "No, I said yes that we didn't have anybody scheduled." It's like, you said yes 3 separate times. You know who else did that? Peter to Jesus. He betrayed him.
Wow.
Is that right? Is that the right biblical allusion that I did there?
Before Peter? The crow.
Exactly. Before the
rooster. Yeah.
The rooster crows. Yeah.
Yeah. Rooster crows.
3 separate times you'll deny me. Peaches hit us with 3 yeses and then pretend he was like, recording today. No, you guys go ahead. He chiefed us. He got us good.
But he really is the rock that the podcast is built upon.
He really is the very small rock. That was another biblical allusion.
Yeah. You're welcome, Milspec believer. See, we read the book.
Man, we out here. We out here.
All right.
Well, if you're
still
train
around, hard. Yeah. Yes. Keep training in the water. It's fine. Just
everybody
keep doing your job.
Everybody take a breath. Get it?
But did you just do that? Really?
Had to do it to close out.
Are you finally awake? Is that what happened?
No.
You were pretty angry earlier.
I'm always angry.
All right. Well, the memes could be better about the dive stuff. I want to see more good memes. Yeah. They've been, I don't know.
It's more just like woe is me and the sad stuff like fizzled out pretty quickly, but that's what the internet is. Follow us on OnesReady.com. Go to the Instagram. Leave us a DM. Send us a message. We take your feedback. We try. Yeah.
Being frugal in reality is buying stuff that lasts. So that mission mercantile stuff will last until your grandchildren are dead. So that's the true frugality right there.
Jesus. All right.
Something to think about. We're just dust in the wind.
Train hard, everybody. You've been dying since you were born. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.